Welcome. This is Jeffrey Zavik, CEO and founder of Immunolaboratories. You are about to experience a profound, interactive conference call with 30 doctors and 2 of the world's leading business advisors. First, let me tell you about our business advisors. Jay Abraham is the highest-paid marketing consultant in the world. He is most famous for discovering low-cost and no-cost hidden assets and opportunities within every business he analyzes. When you type Jay's name into Yahoo on the Internet, you'll discover over 55,000 references. Forbes magazine labeled Jay Abraham as one of the top business coaches in the country. Friend Tarkenton said, Jay Abraham really is a marketing genius. Jay has added billions of dollars in sales and profit increases to the bottom lines of businesses and professionals many people I know and respect. Our second advisor is Chet Holmes. Chet has had more than 50 Fortune 500 clients with performance-based fees as high as $1 million per client. He has taught programs at Merrill Lynch, Wells Fargo, Pacific Bell, Thomson Newspapers, W.R. Grace, Estee Lauder, Warner Brothers, Solomon Brothers, Kidder Peabody, and many more. Chet Holmes has designed over 500 advertising campaigns, consistently the highest pulling ads that clients have ever run. He has taught thousands of business owners how to increase sales, profits, and revenues. To set the stage for this exciting interactive event with Jay, Chet, and 30 physicians, let me explain how this session came to be. Immunolaboratories recently completed an analysis of our 23 years of testing, which included over 200,000 laboratory tests performed worldwide. In speaking with some of our 1,200 physician clients and statistically analyzing our test data, we realized that we have a program that can accomplish several important and very timely things, which we believe will be of high priority for you as a physician. For your patients, our program will make them healthier, oftentimes when all else has failed. We have case studies documenting the alleviation of more than 50 chronic conditions. You'll hear solid proof in this session straight from the doctors all over America. What this will do for you as a physician is to raise your community reputation by helping you become famous as a doctor that is relieving chronic conditions. You'll also learn how to increase your net revenues up to $250,000 a year without spending one penny. As this session begins, Jay, Chet, and I will lay some foundation. Then several of the 30 doctors will share their personal experiences, providing you, the listener, with solid evidence of how these physicians have elevated their community reputation, helped up to 95% of their patients, and added cash revenues to their practice. Immunolaboratories underwrote the cost of this event, driven by a sincere desire to help you help your patients find a simple, proven way to get much healthier. Let's begin. I want to welcome everyone that's participating in this call. Thank you very much for spending your valuable time with us. I think you're going to quickly see it's very worthwhile, and I'm not going to take a lot of time with introductions. We're going to begin, though, with Chet Holmes, who Industry Week said Chet Holmes breaks rules, sales records wherever he goes, and he's named one of the top 20 change experts in the country. My personal experience with Chet over the last 4 or 5 months, I would call him the man that brings out the best in you. So I'm going to turn it over first to Chet, and then Jay Abraham will join us shortly and carry forward. Welcome.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Jeffrey. The other thing I think is probably worth mentioning is that I was the head of another group. It was called the Live Research Laboratory, and we had 630 doctors on a conference call for 18 months where we discussed alternative ways for them to grow their practice and enhance their practice and build their business. And so I have a lot of experience in this market, but in addition to that, I also have the technology that I've gathered from the Fortune 500. I've had 50 Fortune 500 clients from Estee Lauder to Merrill Lynch. So I thought we would start. I know that Jeffrey commissioned another researcher who's done a lot of projects for the Fortune 500 to kind of get a state of the affairs, Jeffrey.
Yes.
And we both had that in front of us, and I thought maybe we'd run them through kind of like what's going on right now in the healthcare as just as a general rule, as a way to give them an overview, and then we'll go to drill down to the specific practice issues. So You want to
Well, for example, the healthcare spending now in general has topped $1 trillion. It's $1.2 trillion, and 3/4 of those dollars are being spent on treating chronic conditions, which is a staggering number. And the other thing that I found real interesting from this Fortune 500 researcher was that when she started to research the statistics and data on the healthcare industry, she was noticing that everything was growing. For example, physicians' practices were growing in size. Healthcare workers, such as nurses and administrators, their wages were going dramatically upward. Prescription revenues were going way through the roof. And even out-of-pocket spending, the cash that patients were paying, and HMO fees were all going up. But there was one thing that was going down by as much as 11%, and that was physicians' income. So that was rather shocking.
So in other words, everybody in the healthcare market is making more money but the doctors.
That's what the data indicates.
So the doctors are actually making less money.
Correct. Yeah. So, and by the way, some of the correlations that were made when they started looking at doctors' income in certain parts of the country were, rather dramatically low. And what they were concluding was that in many areas, particularly prosperous areas where physicians are being drawn and attracted to practice, they literally can't afford to be there because the median house, the price, is out of range for the average physician. So it got so extreme and to the point of ridiculousness where I actually have a quote. A doctor in Sacramento, California, quote, "At 14 cents per member per month, I could work at McDonald's for minimum wage and realize more profit." It seems that everything else in the healthcare industry is going upward. The income for doctors is tending to go downward.
Okay, so I think that is what prompted you to want to do this call.
It is.
Have us come in here and see what we can do to help, and that, I think, leads to a nice segue for Jay to give your dissertation on the 3 ways to build any practice. Jay?
I'll do it very rapidly. Gentlemen and women on the call, I apologize because what I do by day is work privately with operating businesses that want to dramatically enhance their performance, their profitability, and their preeminence in their respective marketplace. I do it long term, and so I'm going to try to condense what I've done over 4 days, 4 years, 4 decades into 20 minutes. So bear with me. First thing is, I believe that you have an obligation to your business and to your clients to maximize your efforts, your activities, your opportunities, your investment of capital, of human capital, meaning personnel, and of opportunity cost. I don't believe most people in business have a clue about how many superior performing options and alternatives there are that can monumentally outperform and replace the lesser performing mechanisms that you are currently using in all kinds of revenue generating elements of your enterprise. And I'm being general because I'm talking about business in general, but it does, in fact, affirmatively have direct application and correlation to your practice. I deal in the world of geometric business growth. People come to me not because they want little incremental growth of 5 or 10%. They want 50%. They want 100%. They want 3, 4, 500% improvement, certainly in profitability and earnings, if appropriate, manageable in revenue, but they're far more interested in making their enterprise more profitable than they are just making it grow more revenue. I try to get them first and foremost to understand the concept of upside leverage. Upside leverage can be best analogized probably to people in your profession in terms of cholesterol. There are 2 kinds of cholesterol, the good and the bad. Well, there are 2 kinds of leverage. The bad is what most people fall into. It's financial leverage. It's engaging in a purchase of an asset or the lease of equipment that you hope and pray will either appreciate or be so productive that it'll generate a profit or an enhancement far above the cost so that you don't get bitten in the butt by it. And that's a very dangerous approach to creating wealth and prosperity. Positive leverage is getting the same area, the same activity, the same effort, the same client, the same marketing, the same communication to produce many times more yield now and on a residual basis. Case in point, some of you do this in the formalized sense, and many of you do it in the informalized sense, whether you realize it or not. In your practice, whatever means of marketing you employ and deploy, whether it's formalized advertising, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's communication regularly to your active and inactive patients or clients, however you refer to them, it costs you the same fixed effort, time, and expense, both in emotional and financial capital, whether that effort produces X yield, produces 50%, X yield produces 250% X yield. It costs you the same when you bring in a new patient, whether he or she stays one time and leaves, never comes back, whether they come back every 6 months as is recommended and prescribed, whether they come back every 6 months and bring other family members, whether they come back every 6 months and bring and refer all kinds of other people. It costs you the same to deploy services, whether it's a single service activity, et cetera, et cetera. The trick that I'm trying to get to is that you have enormous enhanced leverage in everything you do if you can appreciate the power of it. Now, that stated, I deal in a very simple model for growing any enterprise. It's called the three-way to grow a business model, and it basically is universal. It applies to any and every organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, professional services. The premise is there are not 5 trillion different ways to grow your practice. There are really only 3, and they are as follows. Number 1, acquire more patients. Number 2, secure more yield, revenue, fees, profit from the patients that you acquire per transaction. Number 3, secure more transactions, more repurchase, more revisits from those patients, or if you're a specialist and you only have one application, more utility, which could be referrals or other products and services. Most people normally concentrate, in your profession otherwise, on trying to get more patients. And there's nothing wrong with that, although it is the most expensive, the most laborious, the slowest, most time-consuming, and lowest yield area of the 3. Almost nobody concentrates on securing higher yield per transaction. Almost no one concentrates on getting more turns or visits or repurchases per client. Almost nobody figures out how to get more utility, meaning other products and services. If you work on just one of those 3 areas, and you are all scientists by nature, you can understand this. If you work on just one of those areas, which is what most people who have any ambition or aspiration to grow their enterprise or their practice do, all you can possibly hope for is incremental or linear growth. But if you work on all 3 concurrently, what you do is bring the full power and wonderment of geometry to bear. Case in point, and we usually try to demonstrably evidence this with a simple little model. We take a hypothetical enterprise. It can be a regular business. It can be a medical practice. It can be your practice. And we say, presume that practice had 1,000 patients right now. Presume those patients were generating right this moment $100 unit of purchase every time they came in, and presuming they were coming twice a year. That practice would be doing 1,000 people times $100 a transaction times 2 transactions, or $200,000 in revenue per year. What would happen if you increased each area of that quotient by a mere
3 areas that you talked about?
The 3 areas by a mere 10%. Now, the first thing I got to say is most people, and this is not a condemnation, but I'll be as clinical as you are probably in dealing with your patients. My observation of physicians is that you're not formally trained in marketing, in performance enhancement. You do not really employ any or all of the mechanisms available to improve your ability to generate more patients. For example, I'll give you the most mundane but the most gripping and profoundly disarming first realization. I doubt if most of you can even tell me quantitatively and analytically what your attrition or inactivity rate is. If you have 5,000 patients in your files, how many are active and come and see you whatever computational basis you're comfortable with, every 6 months or every 9 months or every 12 months? Whatever the lesser figure, the ones that don't, that's your attrition rate. If you don't even know what your attrition rate is, you can't try to mitigate or reduce it. If you have attrition reduction programming, formalized, systematized programming in place designed to minimize, reduce, or even eliminate attrition, that alone has the same effect of increasing your patient load. If you could reduce your attrition by 20%, and it's right now 500 patients a year, you've just added 1,000 new patients to your business. If you can reduce it by 50, you've added 250 more to your practice. Excuse me, I'm going back and forth. So most people don't even know that there's probably 40 different ways you can increase the number of patients in your practice. There are probably 3 or 4 or 23 or 4, depending on the specialty that you're involved in, ethical and embraceable ways you could increase the size of the transaction every time a patient comes to you. And I'll give you a rationale and a basis for doing that in just a minute. But let's presume that you only found one of them. There are numerous ethical, moral, and responsible ways that you can increase the frequency that they come and avail themselves of your current or of additional products and services that you render. But the model that I want to give to you is just presume that you didn't become masterful at any of it. You just became modestly more proficient. You increased each of those 3 categories a mere 10%. Remember our model? Our model said that you started with 1,000 patients. Well, now let's say just by coming up with a decent attrition abatement program or a better process of getting your patients to refer other patients, or a little better process of interacting with other professionals and community leaders who could refer people to you. You just increased your number of patients by a mere 10%. That would turn 1,000 to 1,100. Let's say that just by working through a couple of processes, adding more products and services, pricing different, premium pricing certain services, doing things that were very ethical but much more practical, you got your average transaction up a lousy 10% more. Let's presume by proactive, strategic, formalized, systematized process, you were able to get patients to come back a mere 10% more. Not double or triple every year, but instead of coming 2 times a year, you got them to come 2.2. Well, that simple little 10% increase across the board does not have a linear or an incremental effect. It has a geometric. The impact will be increasing your revenue by 33.3%. If you got very serious about it, which my goal is to stimulate and liberate your sense of how much more is possible, you could go a lot more than 10%. By for example, just a challenge, we don't have a lot of interaction. Jody, are you on the phone still? Jody?
Yes, I am.
Can you open up the lines for a minute? So now you're all able to answer me. By your verbal response, how many of you on this call can honestly say that at least 20%, maybe as much as 90% of your practice is driven by either referrals or word of mouth? If you can say that everywhere from 20 to 90% or more of your practice is driven by referrals or word of mouth, will you say yes?
Yes.
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 Okay, now the same ones. All of you said yes. Let's say the average. Now, Jeffrey, I don't have a clue what size the average practice is, but would we say it's $500,000? Is that high or low? What do you think?
That may be high for some individual practitioners and quite low for others.
So can I just say a mean is 350? So if 350 is the mean and 20 to 90% or more of your practice currently is driven by referrals or word of mouth, that means that 70,000 to 90% of 350, 200,000 or excuse me, 270,000 comes from that. Now the same people who said yes, how many of you have at least one formalized, systematized, ongoing referral generating process in place that every one of your staff and you alike deploy at every proper interval, every contact point, every appropriate opportunity that's not hokey and night hypey, but basically extends to those people that are important to you, i.e. your patients, the fact that if they have anybody else in their life, in their family, in their community, in their neighborhood, in their church, in their business, in their social or charitable world that needs the professional services, that you are always open to to confer with them. How many have at least one ongoing formalized referral program in place? If you do, and it's one that is adhered to steadfastly and as scientifically and methodically and systematically as you adhere to every other procedure in your business, from the way that you document, to the way that you process people through the waiting rooms, to the way that you chart and everything else. How many have at least one system in place? Say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Now you can tell that it's a far cry less than the number that said yes, that 20 to 90% of their patients. Now, how many of you who said yes to at least having one have at least two in place? Not just one that you do, but other ones at certain key times of the year, at certain events. It stimulates a specialized referral activity happen, whether it's a letter, whether it's a call, whether it's a thank you, whether it's a follow-up, whether it's something at seasonality, something else that happens. How many who have a second, at least two say yes?
Yes.
It's a far cry. I could go on. How many have three? What you will find, we've studied the highest performing, the most successful enterprises in every sector, and I've studied 400 of them. They're the ones that have the most consistent array of systematized marketing elements in place, and they have formalized referral systems galore. We found 93 unduplicated referral systems, and we've had companies that have generated as much as $100 million a year by employing 20 or 30 referral systems only. They have no formalized marketing other than referral systems. They have full-time people working on it. The point I'm making is there's a lot more leverage available in your business. Now let me move to another area because I want to just sort of cover J. Abraham 101. I also believe that most businesses and professional practices are operated from a revenue or a fee or an income-generating perspective on what I call the diving board theory of business. And by that, if you can envision a farm in the country and a little pond and a swimming hole that's got a plank nailed onto a stump of a tree to dive on. If you can think of that diving board as a reference model for your practice, that the board itself is the revenue, the fees that you generate, your 350 mean or 500 or million or whatever you generate. The stump or the ladder is the mechanism that generates it. And I submit that most enterprises and most professional practices derive currently most of their revenue from one primary approach or revenue source. I think that is very dangerous, and I've never seen a diving board being a propellant that permanently fueled you upward. You do go upward temporarily in the process of plummeting down to earth. If anything happens compromising that one pillar, that one beam, that one support basis that's driving you, you can be compromised, you can be decimated, you can be ruined. I try to get all the clients that I've ever counseled to build what I call a Parthenon, because it's modeled after the Parthenon in Greece, of multiple pillars of revenue that are generating a constant flow of new clients, and then subsequently multiple pillars of revenue that are getting those clients to spend more each time they come in, ethically and nobly, and I'll talk about it in just a moment. Conversely, or concurrently, multiple pillars to generate repurchasing also. Now, if you can think of the Parthenon in Greece, it's been around for eons. It's withstood changes in political climate, wars, elements, wind. If you look at it as slightly compromised now, but that has nothing to do with those elements I uttered. It has to do with the imbecility of some fool person using it as a military arms storage facility during World War II, and a bunch of ammunition's blowing up. It's still standing, and that's what your practice should do if you use a Parthenon approach. And my clients have multiple streams generating their new clients or patients. They would have referral systems, not just one but multiple. They would have marketing. They would have seminars. They would have dual programs with other referral sources, and they would have strategic alliances. They would have endorsers. They would be writing articles. They would be having articles written on them and doing PR and go on and on. But I don't have time now. I'm just trying to give you the high points. The combination of having these Parthenons has another level of combined compounding geometry that it brings to bear. And 5% improvement here, 5% addition there, 10% addition here, 20% addition here. Gentlemen and women, you're all scientists. It has the geometric or exponential impact of profoundly and geometrically improving your revenue, your fees, and correspondingly your profits. Now let me go to why you have a moral and a professional and an obligatory responsibility to deal with these issues. when trying to get people who are inherently loath to doing the kind of things I just talked about, I use a very simple model. If you were in front of me in a room and I was able to see you, I would have a clear glass of water that was half full. I would say to you, presume I own J. Abraham's bottled water shop and bottled water bar, and you walked in and asked me to sell you a half a glass of water. If I took your money willingly, enthusiastically, and smilingly, knowing as I do that your body requires 7.5 more glasses each and every day for it to function correct, for your brain chemistry to function, for you to operate at minimal stress, for all your organs to function, for elimination to work, for your mind to operate at peak and your body to perform as it can, and your energy level to be at its base. And I took your money for that half a glass of water, not first making sure you were fully aware that you needed the other 7.5, and I could comfort myself knowing that you either were getting it somewhere else from a competitor, if you like, or you were content and consciously decided not to get it, or were getting it in some other form. I would be stealing health, production, happiness, longevity, everything else from you. Conversely, if you came every 2 days and bought 8 glasses from me, and I took your money, but didn't assure myself that you were knowingly getting either the other 8 somewhere else or the equivalent, or you at least were aware of its critical need each and every day, I was stealing from you. You have a moral obligation, a responsibility to all your patients and everyone in their lives that are important to them, their loved ones, their family, their children, their parents, to do whatever is necessary to make sure that they have the greatest healthfulness, the greatest longevity, the least amount of stress, the greatest happiness. That is an obligation, I think, that is probably parallel to the oath that you took. And if not, without trying to be theatrical or or melodramatic, if you can embrace that attitudinally, it liberates you and empowers and fuels you to really mount a far more acute, a far more systematic, a far more strategic, and a far more passionate embrace of the kind of things I talked about.
So communication effort is right in there.
You got to communicate. The more you communicate, the more people avail themselves of your services and products. The more they frequent it. The more they tell other people. And I'm sure of the following. I'm sure whenever you get a referral, referrals breed of referrals. They come back the most. They appreciate the most. They keep their appointments the most. They're the most quality form of people. They're far more qualitative than people who come from advertisements. They're the best, but you got to have a systematic process in place. Why don't I stop there and take some water? Is that a good grounding?
Yeah, I think it is. In summary, basically there's 3 ways to grow your practice, and most doctors have never even looked at any of them, except for getting more patients. And as Jay says, the most expensive thing you can do, but more revenue per patient by coming from a position of trying to help them the most you can with the best ways you can, et cetera, which is why one of the reasons why we're on the call here. And then more frequency of visits of patients. And if you just took that grid and you looked at those 3 ways to grow your practice for the first time ever, and you just concentrated on it even a little, Jay is saying you can probably have a 10% increase in there, and that in the course of a year can result in a 33% increase in improvement. And when I did the conference call with the 630 doctors that I led, it was called the Live Research Laboratory, we found that they really enjoyed learning about being better communicators and learning how to market their practice better and learning how to serve their patients better and serve more patients better. And there was one doctor said, well, let's be honest that, yes, I'm a doctor and I didn't want to be a businessman, but if I have my own practice, I'm forced to be a businessman, and if I'm not a decent businessman, I'm not going to be a good doctor. Because if you're not, running your practice well, then you're not going to be around to serve your patients better. So, part of running any business is being an effective communicator, and so that's one of the things we want to help you with. But the other thing is, I think this is a good time to talk about what in particular and how Jay does that speech in every single type of profession or area. That is not specific to doctors. It's something that he teaches in every industry that I've ever worked with him in, which has got to be in like 40 of them now. And, but for our purposes, we happen to have a way for you to enhance all 3 of those areas, and that comes in the form of immunolaboratories. So I thought it might be interesting, Jeffrey, to see if you have doctors out there. Well, first let's set the groundwork of what you do, and I think mostly all the doctors on the call are people who currently are testing patients using immunolabs technology?
Yes.
Okay. Some are extremely active in that process, and others are, here to learn more about it. So I think that I'd like to just share my own story, if you don't mind, Jeffrey.
No, I love that, because I think, one misinterpretation could be that this is really all about money when it's really all about helping people. Profitability is a side effect of helping people more effectively, and your own experience, and your family has been pretty profound. I'd love to have you share it.
Personally, I wasn't that interested in taking the test because I, work out every day. I'm in good physical condition. I'm an athlete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought I was fine, just fine. But my 13-year-old daughter has irritable bowel syndrome, and my son has had migraine headaches since he's about 3 or 4 years old. And, being a person who's been successful in life, I have deployed every resource in the medical community to try and, get these problems taken care of. And, irritable bowel, as I understand it, and I'm not a doctor, but it's basically after they check out every single part of her body and they had her x-rayed and scanned and, this kind of a test and that kind of a test, and they can't really find anything wrong with her. That's what they call irritable bowel syndrome. It's just a condition that caused my poor little daughter, who's a straight-A student, to miss a whole day of school every now and then, where she'd just be in bed with a stomachache, couldn't function effectively. And I remember even at one point saying to her, well, what'd you have for breakfast? You have to watch what you eat. And she said, I didn't have anything for breakfast, Dad. I haven't eaten yet. And here she was in bed with a stomachache all day. And my son with the migraine headaches, we had him to every kind of specialist, including neurologists and brain scans. And I had one doctor suggest that he was allergic to light, and we had him wearing sunglasses for a year. As this 9-year-old kid at school with sunglasses on all the time, and it turned out that wasn't, the issue. So I wanted to have them test. My wife has chronic fatigue. She's always tired. And so I decided, since they were testing, I would test myself as well. Comes back, and my daughter has 6 food toxicities, 6 foods that are toxic to her system, that are cause an allergic reaction. And the big thing for her was gluten. And we just took her off that, and the irritable bowel syndrome went away. And she's so highly sensitive to it that, in fact, she eats breaded chicken with just a little bit of bread that's on chicken. Boom, she has a stomachache the next day for 3 hours. And Jordan, with the headaches, turned out to be his allergies as well. So here in my own life, I saw both children completely cured of chronic conditions that they've had for, in my daughter's case, her whole life, 13 years, and my son's the headache since, I guess, about 3 or 4 years old. And he's 12 now. So I watched these two things go away. But the profound thing for me, which I have now sent, maybe 20 people who've tested there just by myself. But the profound thing for me is I felt great, and I got back the food allergy list, and it turns out that there were 24 different foods that I was allergic to. And probably if you looked at how often I ate those foods, half the time I was basically, causing toxic reaction in my system. So I removed the 24 foods, and within about 4 or 5 days, I started feeling, and I'm 44 years old, and like I said, I'm an athlete. I hold a 5th-degree black belt in karate. I've been at the peak performance in terms of my executive career, and but at 44 years old, I got to the point where at the end of my day, I was finished, and I'm like, okay, well, that's, what happens? I don't feel old, but, you start to tire down, and you don't have that desire to work out as much, and, and then at the end of the day, I would have no energy left, and that was it. I was finished by the end of my day, and I started to feel probably 20 years younger. And so, again, I didn't have a specific reaction, but I found that by having these toxic food reactions in my system, that my energy level had waned dramatically over the years, and I accepted that as a condition of my life. I also had problems sleeping. That went away. I also had bags under my eyes. They went away. I also had a skin condition that was developing on my right hand. It looked like a leather that they said there's nothing you can do. That is completely gone. All these weird little, almost every single little thing that I had learned to live with went away. And then the most profound thing for me is one day I was in an airport after 2 days on the road, and I couldn't really find the right kinds of foods for me to eat, so I was just eating French fries because it was like the one food that I didn't have a toxic reaction to. Unfortunately, when I have 24 allergies, I really have to be in an environment where I can control my diet. So that night, I was at an airport, and I said, I've had 2 days of French fries. I can't bring myself to eat another French fry, and I had a sandwich that had like 4 things in it that I was allergic to, but I was like, the heck with it. And that was the most profound thing, because the next day I was right back to feeling old and tired, and I was sleepy all day, felt like I needed a nap. So that's how the food toxicity affected me. It brought my energy level down. It caused all kinds of small things that were not that measurable. So I have since come to believe, and then Jeffrey confirmed it, that basically 95%, it's probably even higher, but he'll at least put this in writing, 95% of the people that you will test will have some kind of food toxicity that is manifesting itself in some kind of a chronic condition. So basically, you could be testing 95% of your current patients for food toxicities with Jeffrey's, with immunolabs test, and you would be really profoundly helping them in some way. I mean, you have 200 and some thousand case studies, Jeffrey, right?
That's correct. Over 200,000 now.
And these are all case studies of people where you've helped cure or helped eliminate arthritis, fibromyalgia, ADD, ADHD, ear infections. These are all things caused by food allergies. And I've come to believe, just from my own personal experience and from the other people that I've referred who you've also helped, which is, like I said, it's up to 20 people now. And again, in the circles I travel, these are top executives who've gone through the testing, and they're like, oh, my God. So now every time I meet anybody who gets headaches, I'm like, that's probably a food allergy. So I've turned into this monster recruiter because of my own personal success with the program. So now Jeffrey and Immunolabs has a program where they are teaching doctors how to way more effectively help their patients with this kind of testing. And Jay, you were tested years ago, correct? With
I was, and without going through, because I want to make sure that we accomplish everything you want. I had chronic sinus infection. I had a very my intellect was always good, but I would have really weird periods where I couldn't possibly focus. And after they tested and found about 12 things I was really hyperallergic to, they recommended a very interesting regimen. I went on it, and I didn't get sick for 3 years. I lost more weight than I had ever imagined I could, eating all the time, really healthy, had energy, slept like a baby, and it was really quite wonderful. I'm very impressed. I've done something that's very powerful, and let me explain to everybody Process Improvement 101. If you look at any business activity and professional services the same, you can break all kinds of things down to their driving process. When you find the process, if you find 100, 1,000, 5,000 people who are performing the same process, you'll see massive variation. It's a scientific process of testing.
Right.
The difference between the best performer and, let's say, the less performer is variation that could be sometimes multiples of hundreds of percent. If Jeffrey can help us on this call figure out who here on this call has a knack for doing something different and better, explaining it, presenting it, integrating it into their practice, and he or she would be comfortable sharing, number one, very quickly, the key fundamentals of the process or strategy they use. Number two, key elements that other doctors wishing to emulate or apply that needed to follow. And number three, the psychology that's necessary to harbor to make sure that you execute it with integrity and effectiveness. That would probably have an incredible effect.
I think Jeffrey, didn't you ask some people in advance?
Yes.
Okay, good. I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
There are a couple
Then
of
go ahead.
doctors
Excuse me.
that Dr. Hedaya or Dr. Anderson, if they're online.
So if let's pick one, Dr. Anderson, if you...
This guy, how's he going to make himself known because we're in listening?
Punch one, yes. If you punch one on your phone, Dr. Anderson, the operator can connect you into this conversation. Jody, are you there?
Dr. Anderson is now on.
Hey, Dr. Anderson.
Hi, how are you today?
What community are you in?
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Oh, okay. So are you an immunolabs tester?
Yes.
Okay.
We test quite extensively. I don't know how many a week, but we do, just say, Carolyn, 20 to 30 a week probably. Maybe some weeks less than that, but... we've had times where it's more than that as well. So,
is your practice? What kind of practice do you have?
It's primarily family practice.
Okay.
We do basically just about everything you can think of except deliver babies. We also do a lot of manipulation, prolotherapy, IV therapies, nutrition. So.
Okay. And so this is just one of the many different products that you offer to your patients.
That is correct. but it is a very important component that we find as far as one of the earlier places to start, really, when people come in with chronic conditions from, as most of the doctors know, everything from runny noses chronically to headaches to rashes to fatigue. It's one of the first things we look at, basically, because we start explaining to them if you're going to have a problem that's been there for a long time, we need to look at causal issues rather than just covering up the symptom. And
I love that.
Come to us anyway.
I love that. So tell us what your process is. How do you begin the conversation with the patient, and how do you educate them as to, what the process is?
Well, basically, the first thing we do is simply listen to the patient. We take a very thorough history and physical and find out what it is that they have been doing over time that hasn't worked, and discuss that from that perspective. And usually most of them recognize that, yeah, I've tried all these things. I've been to Mayo Clinic, I've been to U of M, I've been to Johns Hopkins, whatever,
wow.
And these things have not helped. And so we started out, okay, you recognize that what you've been doing in the past has not helped, so probably the reason you're here is because you want to look at something different. And so one of the first things is you've got to look at something that you do every day. Not something occasionally, but something every day. Well, that's something you do is eat. And those foods are taken into the body at least 2 times a day. Some people only eat 2 meals, but most people, 3-4 times a day. The other thing that I do, because my background is in agriculture and I do a lot of consulting in agriculture from a quality perspective from foods and nutrition, is that we tell people that, well, gee, the things that maybe our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents ate 50, 60 years ago are not the same as they are today. And something that they may have been able to eat without problem is not the same for us today. And so we need to look at that. And it's something that doesn't cost them a lot of money as far as once the testing is done, it's now up to them. So we look at it from their perspective of finance. Gee, how much money is this going to cost me every month to do this? And also it's something that they can do on their own. Once we do the testing, it's then up to them to do that change. And I always tell people that this is plan A. We're going to eliminate the horses before we go after zebras, so to speak. And so that's usually where we start.
Okay. And what about the results you've had?
Well,
these 20, 30 patients a week, I mean, you must be getting results or you wouldn't be testing that many people.
Absolutely. I would have to say that probably only, less than 5% of the patients don't have some significant improvement, whether it be most of their symptoms or a significant symptom is either reduced or eliminated. And I mean, that's really good as far as what we can see as far as eliminating problems for patients. That is usually fairly straightforward. So we're very pleased with that. And I also do a lot of work with autistic and attention deficit children, people with bipolar disorder, and it feeds right back into work that was originally done. Back in 1972, there was a book written, Nutrition and Your Mind, by George Watson, and he correlated nutrition with behavioral problems as well. So we correlate all of the things that are going on. We show them information that has proven that. So we're not just speaking off the top of our hat. And the bottom line is we have to convince them to at least give it a month or two. And so we see them in a month. We go through the booklet that immunolabs sends with the program. I always go through the symptom checklist to make sure that they are aware of that, grade it, fill it out today, and then in 1 month we're going to fill it out again, and I want to see you, and we're going to make actual comparisons.
Good idea.
And so we walk through that. We actually explain that information twice. The nurses go through it first before the doctor gets into the room, and then when the doctor goes into the room and talks to the patient about their test results, we go over the test again, and perhaps a little bit more in depth, but nonetheless they now have heard it twice in one visit as far as what the test means, how they follow it, and what things they can expect.
Has this test helped you get more patients in terms of your reputation spreading, and were you one of those people who said, yes, I have an active referral program, or?
I can't say that we necessarily have an active referral program, but we do get a lot of patients referred to us by patients who've done this testing.
And so it is a big referral source for you by doing the testing.
Absolutely. We find that because most people, when they have problems, they go to their immunologist. He does a skin test or a RAS blood test, and as a rule, they don't get a whole lot of results. And so they eventually find out that, gee, there's other testing that can go on, and they end up coming to us. And so we explain to them...
So you're getting a reputation for being someone who can really help people that nobody else has been able to help.
That's correct. That's basically the bottom line for our reputation in this area.
That is a great thing. I don't want to ask particulars, but what's going on right now in immunolabs, and Dr. Anderson, you can stay in this conversation with us and add your 2 cents anytime, but Jeffrey has been a very great clinician, and over the 23 years that his laboratory has been in business, they've, really perfected this testing, to a degree of accuracy that's probably 30% better than anybody else. And, they're a good company, and they're a well-run company, but what they really haven't done is they haven't marketed. And so, it's kind of like the same pitch I would give to the doctors I'd give to Jeffrey, in that he has a moral obligation to become more aggressive and to help spread the word more. So behind that, Jeffrey has now built, or is almost completely built, an orientation with visual aids that will help your nurses and anybody else on this call listening, their nurses and their doctors, much more effectively communicate to people how the test works, why it works. Do you explain how the test works, Dr. Anderson?
Well, basically, from my perspective, and I would have to say that we've looked at a number of different laboratories that do the ELISA IgG testing, and our experience is that if we get a test done through immunolabs, 99% out of the time, we can rest assured that that result will correlate to patient performance or results with the patient. I cannot say that about other laboratories, and we have other kinds of tests done by these same laboratories. But when it comes to doing the ELISA IgG foods, for whatever reason, quality control, who knows, we find that immunolabs is the only one that we really can bank on as far as test results are concerned.
But what I was asking is, like, for example, one of the ways that I have convinced 20 people in the last 2 months to take this test is I say, it's a very simple process. They have these little wells, and they put food antigens in the wells, and then they put your blood in the wells, and then it becomes real obvious which foods your blood blends with harmoniously and which foods your antibodies attack. And so that's kind of like a logical thing that people go, oh. And so you can know in a week conditions or toxicity reactions that you've had for a lifetime. And I was just wondering, because Jeffrey's put together now with his company and his marketing experts a doctor orientation that you will be able to very quickly, with nice visual aids, show to any patient, and then also brochures that they can take home to show to their spouses or their neighbors or whatever, and that are all so those are tools that you haven't had in the past. Do you think they would be valuable to you in your practice?
Well, I think they will if they don't get too complex. What I usually find when I go through and explain it, I'll talk about the different antibodies that the body produces, particularly with reactions, IgE and IgG, and I'll simply explain that one is immediate reaction that they can usually think of, like bee stings or rashes and whatever, and the other one is a more delayed reaction.
There you go.
And I don't get it too much more complex than that unless they specifically ask.
Right.
But they usually will ask, well, what is the difference between this and what my allergist did, because I've already been tested for allergies. So then we do get into that differentiation between IgG and IgE.
Okay, cool. Jay or Jeffrey, you have any more questions for Dr. Anderson?
I think he did an excellent job. I kept making a few notes of things I wanted to ask, and it would be the next thing coming off his lips. I was very interested in the referability that took place, and he answered that there was a strong referral based on the good results that people were having with the test. So he covered it for me.
Jeffrey, just talk about that database now that you've uncovered. I know you can't offer it today, but you have a database that targets people according to their chronic conditions?
We found a phenomenal resource on the Internet, and we'll soon be able to actually deliver to our doctor clients the actual current statistics of the chronic conditions that we're targeting and that they find they're most effective with in their immediate area. We'll be able to correlate chronic conditions, number of people with those chronic conditions, addresses and or emails, and the radius within which they exist in their area.
So in Dr. Anderson's Grand Rapids practice, you could tell him there's 15
1,238 with arthritic pain or arthritis that are not yet solved. It literally gets that clear in the database.
But how can it help their practice, Jeffrey? What are some of the ways that, I mean, obviously Dr. Anderson has stated that he is now getting a reputation in his community, and so that's making him a hot referral source for new business. But talk about what are some of the other ways. How does it improve the financial image or picture for a physician?
Well, there are a variety of different ways. First of all, many of these physicians, such as Dr. Anderson's example, they do a multitude of tests and services and provide them to a wide spectrum of ages. So it's very common for one person to walk in due to our food allergy testing, but it's also equally common for them to bring in family and friends and or themselves with other conditions and other needs, so that they end up enrolling in a variety of other services, which ties directly into Jay's model that he relayed a little bit earlier.
Right.
The second thing is that many of our physicians have developed rather comprehensive programs around the test. They may have a nutritionist on staff. They themselves may have the patient checking in on a periodic basis with our very simple system of this symptom checklist, where they periodically will return, not for any extensive time-consuming meeting, but more so to check in and refresh that symptom checklist, which as they check in every week or two or three, or even every month or two, they find that the symptoms and the intensity of the symptoms goes down, so that they build a program around that which generates additional revenue in the form of office visits and so forth.
But to sidetrack just for a second, I know that you said you have some doctors now that they have every single patient that they have is filling out the symptom checklist. So me, for example, I go to my GP, and I'm in there for who knows what other reason, my annual checkup, or because I've got my shoulder hurts or something. And while I'm in the waiting room, there are doctors now that are having every single patient fill out the symptom checklist.
Yes.
As part of the regular office visit.
Yes.
So while he's treating me for the shoulder that is all wrenched out of place, and then either probably in most cases referring me on to another doctor, but because he's a GP. But he would also say, well, Chet, I noticed that you have trouble sleeping. You put that you're getting skin irritations. You blah 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 blah. Have you ever? What's that question you have? Have you ever thought of how food might be affecting?
Yes. Has anyone ever tested you? Has anyone ever checked the link between how you feel and what you're eating? Has anyone tested you for that link? And in almost every case, other than very innovative physicians, the answer from the patient is always no. Do you think it has something to do with how I feel? And, of course, our physicians are saying yes, and you ought to do this test, and you really have nothing to risk because we guarantee results with it, knowing that 95% of the time we're pretty darn effective. So it opens it up quite easily to making it very easy for the physician to relate to the patient. That's why we're developing the tools that will have more patients asking that question, not with just the
more
symptoms.
Doctors, you mean?
More doctors and more patients, though, inquiring because of the tools that will provide for the physicians in their offices.
You are now on a big communication push, and you're going to help, and you're doing a big PR launch, right?
Correct, yes. We're also going to employ a national PR firm to work in conjunction with us to generate more activity across the country.
And then the doctors who are effective at communicating what you do and serving patients, they will get those referrals in their area.
Exactly. Another item that when we talk about other services, and again, tying to Jay's excellent model, is quite a few of the physicians that have employed our testing are also physicians that use one or more nutritional type products. And so there are these continued sales or residual repeat sales of very important nutritional products that a wide spectrum of them. There are many, many product lines.
I just want to put in here before you go too far down that path, because I know that that you have doctors who, well, I'll just use my own doctor. Doctor's been in practice for 25 years. He may not want to go off on some big thing, but so what I'm saying is, yes, there's great, and Dr. Anderson has really evolved his practice, but this is for any general practitioner could literally test 90% of his patients and be able to help them with chronic conditions without adding a single dollar in additional overhead, and be generating a tremendous amount of additional revenue from their current practice without spending any extra money, except for maybe mailing a letter to their list saying, hey, I have a new test, or as we have some of the doctors now, right, that you're working with, they just start testing 4 or 5 patients a day, and depending upon what state they're in and what the laws are for that state, you can add up to $250,000 in additional revenue that doesn't cost you any additional money to generate. Is that correct?
That is correct, and the business was built 23 years ago on that very theme, which is all we did was a simple food allergy, food toxicity test, and a simple food avoidance program, and the whole business has been built up from the success of just simply having people avoid these foods. It's absolutely
true.
true.
So you have thousands and thousands of doctors now who have offered this to their patients, and then some who are like Dr. Anderson who really get the hang of it and see that he can help a lot more patients that way. So he is testing, you're testing Dr. Anderson like 3-4 patients a day, 4 or 5 patients a day.
Depending on the day, some days.
And how many patients do you see in a day?
On the average, I'll see
total.
14 to 20.
Okay. And I thought we saw some national statistics. It was like 30 or 40. So he's testing like 30% of his patients, but
yes, just as recent as less than a year ago, the American Dietetic Association did a survey and reported that 30 to 35% of all Americans think they are food allergic.
And you know that 90% are, but only 30% think they are.
That's a huge number, though.
Yeah. So I think tying it back to Jay's model, it'd be very easy for a doctor to add, to very simply start adding this test as one of their tools in their tool bag that helps them help their patients be healthier, but at the same time can radically increase their practice. And I know that the different states have different rules, like Florida, for example, is they can mark up the cost of the test and earn it.
Actually, they cannot. Many of the states you cannot. Some states you can. Some states you can, of course, have fee for service, and in many instances, so that there's no problem there. And others are more insurance oriented. There's a wide spectrum. That's why it's a tough one to cover in this
So
call.
How do we get it covered?
I would highly recommend any physician interested in the details of that and the revenue models should simply make the call here, and the representative in their area will immediately respond and give them the facts and work with them as it relates to their state, because there are such a wide spectrum now of law. We actually retain a legal firm just in medical specialty due to this complexity of law these days.
Okay, so you mentioned another doctor. What was his name?
Dr. Hidayah, if he is still on the line. He's in the practice of psychiatry, which might be very fascinating.
Dr. Hidayah, can you press 1? And Jody, can you get Dr. Hidayah into the call?
Dr. Hidayah is now in.
Hello.
Dr. Hidayah, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Where are you out of?
I'm in Washington, D.C., just outside of Washington, D.C., in Chevy Chase, Maryland.
Oh, cool. Okay. And you have a psychiatry practice?
Yeah, it's
with immuno in terms of serving the patients and how it's impacted your practice?
Yeah, I started several years ago using immunolabs, and then I was courted by some other companies to try their tests, and I did, and I always run split samples and found that there were real inconsistencies in the results. And
with all the labs, or?
Well, I tried.
I want to clarify. Yeah.
Well, I tried 2 different labs that had technology that seemed to make sense to me on a scientific basis, and then I would wait until I got the technique down, because some of them are pretty complicated, and then I would submit split samples, and I just found a lot of unreliability, and I went back to immunolabs because it really seems to be most reliable and correlates well with the patient outcome.
Okay. So you do split sample, meaning you'll send the same blood sample under 2 different names.
That's right.
And then in most cases you were getting back different results, and from immunolabs you were getting back the same results.
Right.
Okay. I just want to clarify that, because it almost sounded like you were getting those bad results from every lab. And I know that Jeffrey has like 33 different proprietary methods of trying to, of making sure that his tests are highly accurate, because that would make him absolutely go crazy if he saw 2 different results, right?
Yeah, and in that I tip my hat to Dr. Irritable. I think one of the keys about any lab is the laboratory director, and that's where you find that most of the time the director doesn't have the experience and the training. We have not just a director, but we have a scientist that oversees every one of our tests in Dr. Irritable. So that we do split samples, by the way, every single week, and have for the last 10 to 15 years. We have a huge volume of split samples for the last 10 to 15 years through Dr. Irritable.
Just to make sure that you're always getting
We have
accurate.
to be certain that we know that we're reproducible.
Yeah, okay, beautiful. So tell us about your practice and how you integrated the immunotesting and how it's impacted your practice.
Well, my practice, as I said, started with a typical psychiatric practice. Now I practice what I call whole psychiatry. So I look at
great! I love that idea.
the whole picture, and I don't fragment the approach. So I pretty much run, I'd probably say 90 or 95% of my new patients through the immunolabs blood print testing.
Wow.
And I think it's essential, and it's I would agree with, I think it was Dr. Anderson, that maybe 5% don't benefit from it.
And so how do you introduce it to them? Similar ways to Dr. Anderson, or you talk about the mental acuity, or?
Well, I've published a couple of books, and so when people come into my practice, they know something about what I do, and I have a website, and they usually, we always direct them to that before they come in, so they know what's going on with the practice and how we approach things, and then after a very extensive evaluation, physical, I will kind of overview the systems that I think are involved, and I'll tell them that these are the different areas I want to test. And I don't specifically focus on the food sensitivity unless there are questions about that. I try and use an analogy of interacting and intervening in the different systems in the body at the same time in order to maximize the outcome and improve the speed of response. So I'm not focusing on that one test.
Okay. So you're just using it as one of the tools in your tool bag again.
Yeah, it's a very fundamental test.
You know what? I forgot to mention that one of the biggest things I noticed myself, and having you on prompted this, but you know how you're starting to say something and you lose your trend of thought? That, well, prior to removing all the food toxicities from my system, I had that happen about 30 times a day, and one of the biggest things I noticed is that went away. Went down to 2. Now, of course, on this call, while all these people are listening, I'm going to forget my train of thought and make a fool out of myself. But I really did have this dramatic boost in mental acuity.
The brain has a lot of immune cells in it, and it's clear to me, although I have to say maybe 10 years ago I would have laughed, it's very clear to me that the activity of the immune system is very important in improving brain function.
Well, I certainly experienced it myself. Okay, so can we have other people that want to talk about how they introduce it in a different way, maybe punch one and get into the conversation?
If you do it differently, or if you've got a different way of employing it, deploying it, articulating it, introducing it.
Is Dr. Cherentenko out there today?
We have Dr. Cherentenko online now.
Hi, Jeffrey. Great conference to everybody, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. We have a letter that we put in our waiting room, and I think that many of the patients are seeking guidance from their doctor. There still is a little bit of old-fashioned medicine left, and they feel their doctor is still the expert. And just briefly, I'll read a couple of the paragraphs that we have. It starts out that says, many people suffer from chronic diseases that they never discuss with their physician. Many chronic diseases are directly linked to the foods we eat, but no one knows that. As your physician, I believe it is essential that you test yourself for foods that may be contributing to your illnesses or symptoms that may be affecting you. Fortunately, there's a laboratory test I personally recommend, which is Immunolabs in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We can send a simple blood sample and within days be able to tell you what foods may be contributing to your various chronic symptoms. Ask a staff member to have you fill out a symptom checklist to see if allergies are a basic contributor to your overall concerns. Many times the money spent on this test is well offsets the money that you spend on a daily basis to try and feel better. And then I just sign it as I'm a MD.
Well, I think a great line I heard from one of Jeffrey's representatives, one of them had said something like, when we figured out how much money I'm spending on food and that half of what I was eating was poison, was like I was spending $6,000 a year to poison myself. So it's a small price to pay to spend that money on foods that are totally healthy for you in the long run.
Exactly.
Anybody else? Punching number one.
Is Dr. Barbarian there?
Dr. Barbarian's now online.
Yes, this is Dr. Barbarian from San Juan, Puerto Rico. What I do in my office is that last 4 or 5 months, I am my practice is bariatric practice, which is weight control, and I'm a family physician. So the first time the patient walks in the office, my secretary gives them the checklist. So the patients already filled up, and when they come to
That's automatic then.
It's automatic.
Yeah.
As soon as they walk in, they get the checklist. So when they come and sit with me, I explain to them what my program is, and I tell them that this is a complimentary test to help them because I'm a patient. I was very sick a few years ago with the same symptoms that you were describing, and I feel 100% better now just because I stopped eating. So already telling them my experience as a doctor, as a professional that knows what he's talking about, they tend to listen to me, and I got many referrals. Although my practice is not as big as Dr. Anderson's, I see maybe 8 to 10 patients a day because I work half a day now from 8:30 to 12:30. So I increased my revenues last 2 years by doing immunotesting, by adding it to my practice. As you also mentioned that I try to find other products that I can add up on the same patients that coming to me. I have skin products that I use for my lady patients that like to improve their appearance of their skin. I do the immunotesting. So the combination of these things helps them to feel good and look good, and they will bring me more patients. They bring their mother, their sister, whatever. And this, for me, is a basic, way that I deal now, because giving them the checklist, I also tell them that, I have something else that other doctors don't have. I'm offering them a test that none of the doctors are doing here. And that already gives me an edge to compare with the other doctors who are doing only skin testing, or they are not doing at all this kind of testing. And it gave me a name now also in San Juan that I do some specific testing for food allergies. And people are more aware of it because I go on radio programs and I go on television and I talk about this.
That is great. Well done.
Dr. Barbarin's actually been somewhat of a celebrity herself there with articles and exposure with the media. They've picked up on some of the people she's helped, some of the celebrities in her area as well.
Just out of curiosity, the one in San Juan, are you fee-for-service or are you insurance or a combination?
I don't take it. I'm in practice in San Juan for 20 years. I never took any insurance. I don't belong to HMOs. My practice is fee-for-service, and they have to pay me after I finish the service with them.
Okay. How about another doctor? Want to comment on how
There's Dr. Mulders out there?
Press 1, Dr. Mulders.
Dr. Mulders is now online.
Yes, Dr. Mulders. I'm in Paoli, Pennsylvania, and I do only fee-for-service.
What kind of practice do you have?
I do general practice, very nutritional-oriented, and I probably do a food allergy test on probably 4 to 5 people that walk in.
Wow.
And I've had excellent result with that.
How do you introduce it?
Usually I draw people a diagram and I say all the different factors that affect health. And I mention the bowel and food allergies and toxins and chemicals and stress. And, usually as I talk that way, it becomes people are just willing to do it. And usually I use a couple of examples, too, of patients.
Tell them about other patients you've
had. I used the example of my wife a lot. That always works very well, yeah. And I had, for a long time, I had actually issues about the cost for the immunotest, because there were other labs that were doing it cheaper, but I didn't have good results with that. And since I verified for myself, too, that the results are better, I've had no issue with that. And patients don't make an issue of it either. That's right.
It's worth it, It's
That's
worth
correct.
it to be healthy myself. I mean, forget about it.
Yeah.
It's so worth it.
Yeah. So, but as far as the fee-for-service, then at the end of the day, 95% of what I worked for is can be put in the bank.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So fee-for-service, that's going to be a big thing. All right. We got 5 minutes left. Let's go to general questions. Anybody who wants to ask a general question, either of Jay, myself, Jeffrey, or any of the other doctors, press 1. And Jody, you can bring them in. Is there anybody asking questions?
We have Dr. Hidea back online. Please go ahead.
I'm interested in setting up structured referral programs and systems, and what resources you have for learning about that.
In response to you, Doctor, I have 2 approaches. Probably the easiest and what I think would be the nicest services. I have interviews that I've done with the better part of 100 companies that employ different proprietary referral systems. These are they're not sound bites, but they're 3-4 minute interviews where we got the essence of what their referral system built on, what the key elements are, the psychology behind it, and the 4 or 5 key what to do's if you were going to try to adapt or adopt it to yours. It's recorded. It's not tightly refined, but it's real words, and it's very easy for you to figure out how to extrapolate. I would have no problem giving
that available through immunolabs.
Giving it to Jeffrey with the understanding that he made it available to any of his active accounts with my permission. That would not be a problem.
Cool. Another question. Anybody else? We got a few minutes here. Press 1.
And Chet, if they don't have a question.
Sorry, we got another doctor. Go ahead.
Dr. Spitz, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm a family doctor in Florida, and I'm curious, especially with Dr. Anderson, who's a family doctor, and it looks like he's doing 25 to 50% of his people he's testing. I've just gotten started with this and have actually only tested a few people, but the ones that I'm asking, I don't take very many HMOs, but almost everybody's insurance, and they don't want to do it when they realize they have to pay about $500 for the test. I'd just be interested to know how people approach it from that aspect.
Well, part of the educational process is to what they call cost justify, and that's some of the stuff that Jeffrey's putting together now. So
why don't you just ask? I mean, real quickly, why don't you ask, well, who on this call believes they have the best cost justification or the best bridge for that scenario to push.
Great idea.
And just let them answer the way they do it, because it's real world, it's case study.
Well, I'm going to interrupt on that one, Jeffrey, only because the variation in law and allowability in states is so varied. I don't know if that will be as helpful as it would in another industry where there aren't these kinds of bizarre rules. It's just what applies in one place doesn't at all apply in another.
But with that disclaimer, and with the urgent direction that you got to check with local authorities.
Yes, and what I'll do is each of the reps are aware of this call or in the call, and
I'd still like to hear how other people do it relative. I mean, again, how somebody does it in a state that the way they do it is fully compliant and appropriate. I'd still like to hear how they do it.
I'd love to hear somebody how they cost justify spending $500 on the test.
All right. Or maybe everybody, if they're all fee-for-service, then they've got patients who are plenty rich enough to just say, I'll spend $500.
Well, for me, I spent $1,700 per person in the family because it's worth it, but money is not as much of an obstacle for me. But I'll just say, and I think Jay is right, we need to get somebody else who's already done it. But I think that, there's a thing called, in any kind of a transaction, there's a thing called cost justification. You can say, how much do you spend on food? Well, you're spending this much on food. Wouldn't you like to know if half of that is poisoning your system? Because Jeffrey offers a money-back guarantee. If they test themselves and they don't find out that they've actually improved their health as a result of finding out what foods are toxic for their system and removing them, they get their money back. Now, that doesn't apply when you have insurance and all that other stuff, and I know that's, again, a law issue, but I know that was offered to me, when I took the test because I didn't, I was concerned about it. He said, well, look, if we don't find anything, it's, it's money back guaranteed. So, but let's get another doctor on who does a good job of that cost justification, who can talk about it. It hit 1, and I'm sorry, it's going to drop the other doctor who was just on, but Jody.
Dr. Cherentenko online, go ahead.
Hey, again, just real quick, we have a letter that we give to the patients and ask them to go call their insurance company. We also give them the diagnoses that we feel will best be reimbursed by that insurance company and some of the buzzwords for them to ask. And we have about 90% of our insurance companies that do pay indeed for the test. We also then ask them, because they have a prompt pay type price, that immunolabs does that, and Jeffrey can comment if that's available in all states. But if the insurance company indeed turns them down, then we tell them to send in a check with the sample. And frequently then the test is being able to be performed at a much reduced rate for a check that's included with the sample. And our patients love that. So they get the okay from the insurance company. If the insurance company says no, then they get a modest savings on sending in the check.
You were right, Jeffrey. Every single state's going to have different. Every doctor's going to have a different approach.
But not to ignore it, what we'll do is just on a doctor and a rep basis, each one of them will talk to them in detail, because we've had to go to great extent to learn what these laws are and work with it.
All right, we are out of time, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jay.
My pleasure. I hope it was helpful, everyone.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hi, this is Jeffrey Zavik again, and as stated during this program, 75% of all healthcare dollars are spent on chronic conditions. Unfortunately, most of these billions of dollars are spent to relieve symptoms and not cure the cause of the problem. Immunolaboratories has a safe and proven test that is guaranteed to relieve and in some cases completely resolve many of these chronic conditions. All it takes to get started is your use of a very simple symptom checklist and asking your patients just one question, which is, has anyone ever tested you for the link between what you eat and how you feel? You will be amazed when up to 95% of your patients have positive outcomes with our testing. Regarding increasing your revenue, each state has different laws. Our consultants are trained and briefed on these laws, ready to help you integrate these powerful tests right into your practice. Call toll-free to help your patients and help your practice become vibrantly healthier. Call now, 1-800-231-9197. That number once again is 1-800-231-9197. We look forward to serving you soon.